Ladies and gentlemen, Kirk Thatcher and Darren Doctorman, the Weirded Beardos. And yes, here we are.
No!
The previously known as Weirded Beardos, otherwise known as the what?
Frickin' fricker.
Beavis and
Beavis
Knothead.
Hello, Darwood.
Hello, Crick.
Were you Durwood when you were a kid because of Bewitched?
Some people called me Durwood, yeah, because of Bewitched.
Yeah.
Which,
It was not terrible.
well, it's not terrible, but it's not fun. Especially since I never really watched Bewitched. I was an I Dream of Jeannie.
Oh, I like both. I mean, Jeannie was way more hot, but I liked Samantha was like the cool mom, where Jeannie was like, yeah, I want her to show me things,
It seems to me that I don't know. I've thought about this, of course.
I've spent many a lonely night thinking about
It seems to me that Samantha might be more surprising in certain situations.
Yeah. Well, so I
Like a
always
little more
thought,
worldly.
did I explain my pitch for Bewitched back in the 80s when I was at Paramount? They were talking.
You're be-pitched.
Yeah, they were talking about doing a Bewitched movie, and I had a great pitch for it, which was that it's basically how they meet, and Darren's like in love with magic. Oh my God, give me a promotion. Let me run the company. Let's live in a big house. He basically becomes a total jerk using her. Sam, you got to make us rich. Sam, I wanted the new Rolls Royce. Sam, I'm only going to get the job. Why do we even have a job? Let's just be rich. And he's just.
That's a pretty good Dick York, actually, while you're going there.
Sam? He lounges around the house with a pipe and a smoking jacket, and he just, he's dallying with this and that, and he becomes a total jerk. And so she's like, you know what? I'm leaving you. And he's like, what? Why? You're a witch. Or we're like, why do we, and he basically comes around, kind of the dark tea time of the soul to realize it's like an addiction for him. That's why he's like, because it never made sense to me as a kid. Why does he say, don't use magic? Why?
Yeah.
Don't make things easy.
Why the hell not?
So to me, it set up why he would be so dead set against having things easy. And it made sense. There's a logic to it. It could be really fun of just how insane he gets. And he's always, begging her to do this magic thing and, like show up the bully. So he's using her, and ultimately she's like, you don't love me. You just use me for
right.
me. He's like, no, you see enough of the meet cute that I still think it's a great pitch. I don't know who owns. They did that horrible Nora Ephron. Was it Nora Ephron who did the Bewitched with Will Ferrell and Nicole Kidman playing actors playing Darren, but the idea was that Nicole was really. I'm like,
was really a witch. Yeah,
it was terrible. It was dumb. I don't know if it was supposed to be like feminist or something.
I don't know. I mean, it was sadder that Nora Ephron was doing it. That she was sort of reduced to doing this crap.
Yeah, it's kind of crap I did. Wait a minute.
No, you know what I mean. I mean, she's known for writing and directing some great things. One of which I worked on.
Yeah, really? Which one?
Sleepless in Seattle.
I didn't know you worked on that. That was really early on?
Well, relatively. I think it was like the fourth movie I worked on.
What did you do on that?
I was an illustrator. As it turns out, there's a funny story behind that.
Do tell.
Well, the production designer was an established guy, and I think he got my name from maybe from one of the other designers that I'd worked with. And he called me up and said, we're doing this movie up in Seattle, and we need someone to come and help figure out, there's a couple dream sequences in the movie. Now, these dream sequences were later cut.
I was going to say, I don't remember the dreams.
But it was a dream sequence that involved a sort of stylized map of the United States that would sort of connect New York with Seattle and through various scenarios. And I was brought in to help figure that out. Now, at the time, I, like a very dedicated union person, I came into the union as a junior illustrator.
Right.
And
small illustrations.
I only do the small ones. Yeah.
I only do the small ones. Yeah.
Because that's, I wanted to go the correct route, right? And I didn't want to skip any steps.
You were Darren Stevens. Don't use magic.
That's correct.
No.
That's correct. So they hired me, not realizing that on a union show, you need to have a senior illustrator hired first.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Even though I had all the hours to become a senior illustrator, but I hadn't submitted them to contract services to get my grade up.
Right.
So after basically a month and a half of working up in Seattle on this show, the union made them fire me. Isn't that nice?
Yeah, unions are...
They're a double-edged sword, man.
Yeah, well, my weird union job was I was going to do this, well, I ended up doing it, a movie for the Henson Company called Turkey Hollow, which was a fun idea. It was a idea that Jim Henson and Jerry Jewell noodled around and written up like an 8-page thing and 8-page outline. And Jim had made this, well, the first creatures he'd made or had made with glass eyes, with the taxidermy eyes. And so they were kind of the beginning of the creature shop stuff. Anyway, they found this outline literally in the back of a file drawer when they were moving stuff out of the New York offices. And long story short, they wanted me to write and direct it, but then I couldn't direct it and write it if it was going to be done in Canada. And so I said, well, I'd rather direct it than write it. And, so anyway, they made an offer to direct it, and it was remarkably low, shockingly low. And I just needed to work, and I wanted to do the project because it was Jim and Jerry, two of the guys that were my mentors. So I kind of went, even called a buddy of mine. I'm like, oh man, I don't like this. It's like, is this set up my? Because I'm like, how does the union even allow you to do this? And he's like, well, work is work, man. I wouldn't turn it down.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, that is why this is so sober is your counsel. So I took the gig. And leaving out some acrimonious calls between lawyers and things like, and I was going to, we were shooting in Canada. So I was going to Vancouver like on a Friday, and I got a call from the union on a Wednesday. This is, Sarah blah, 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 whatever her name was from the DGA. You can't do this picture. I'm like, what? And they said, you can't do it. It's not union. I said, well, no, they told me it was union. So, well, it's not. The fee is incredible, like not even close to guild minimums, or it's like half. And I was like, well, that's what I thought. And when I told them that, and my lawyer that, they're like, oh, no, we checked. This is the guild minimums. And so she said, yeah, you can't do it. I'm like,
well, they can't stop you from doing non-union.
Well, yes. But what they meant was you can't do this under a union contract. I mean,
right.
You go in and do whatever you want. But and so I called Lisa Henson because I'm going to call lawyers. We've already had enough lawyering.
Lisa.
And I said, the union just called me, the DGA, and said I can't do this picture. She's like, what? I said, yeah. They said you're not paying even close to or whatever the percentage less. Yeah, she goes, well, that's ridiculous. We looked it up and everything. So she goes, well, let me call the lawyers. And I said, yeah, I thought the lawyers had figured it out. So about 20 minutes later, I get a call from her saying, oh, you know what? Our lawyers were paying you as a Canadian director. It was the Canadian Directors Guild, the CDG.
Meaning 35% of it is in syrup.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was 35% less because it was Canadian dollars. Anyway. So, well, yeah, they had done the Canadian Guild minimums and then converted to US dollars, which was why it was because the Canadian Directors Guild is not as strong.
Yeah.
And they then taken it and converted. I was like, okay, well, that makes sense. And so Lisa apologized. And I mean, there's no hard feelings. But I'm like, okay, because I was like shocked. But it was weird. And then I was directing something in New York. And the union, the DGA rep just showed up and said, hi, are you Kirk Thatcher? I'm like, yes. And I'm like, I'm the DGA rep. I'm like, okay, am I in trouble? And he's like, no, I just wanted to introduce myself. Now I know you're working here in New York. And I'm like, oh, okay. He said, well, if you have any.
I just want to welcome you to the United States because I have it on my list that you're Canadian.
Yeah, it's funny. They just kind of creep up on you. And then same thing happened on Muppet Wizard, not Muppet Wizard of Oz, Muppet Haunted Mansion.
Yeah.
The DGA person, union person, just showed up on set. Everyone's like, "There's someone here to see you." I'm like, who's that? And then this time I said, "Why are they paying me so low?" This is, and she's like, "Oh yeah, it's streaming, it's or digital or whatever."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Well, what does that mean?" He goes, "Well, if it's under $10 million budget, then it's just whatever you can get out of them." I'm like, "Oh God."
Well, if they pay me more, it'll be over $10 million.
Well, it's weird. Shooting in Canada, even the Canadian DGA was more than what I got paid on.
Wow.
Because Disney claimed it, well, and they still do, I guess. I think actually one of the things during the strike a couple of years ago was like, we can't keep saying this is new media. And anyway, yeah, so the guilds are, as you said, a double-edged sword. The other worst thing happened with the WGA once. I'd written a animated feature for the Henson Company. Very nicely hired me to write it, and I wrote it. Spent like 6-7 months on it, and it was basically done. And the next year, the WGA says, "Oh, you owe us whatever, some huge chunk of money that was their percentage that they take, of." And I'm like, "But it was animation. It wasn't. It was an animated script. It wasn't. I thought it wasn't under WGA auspices." And they go, "Well, you're a WGA writer." I'm like, "Yeah, but it wasn't hired under." I thought animation is not.
Yeah.
They're like, "No, if you were, then that would mean you were writing for, non-WJ, non-guild covered things." I'm like, "Well, yeah, you don't cover it. I don't know.
You don't cover animation.
You don't cover animation, but well, we still want your money because you're a WJ member." That's basically how it played out. It was like $12,000. It was not a small amount. It was a chunk of change. I was like, okay.
Let's not forget that the basis of a lot of guilds and unions historically have been organized crime. I'm not saying any more, but let's just say that they've learned over the years methods to extract as much value.
I will say, look, the fact that I even have a pension or two from these also is like, I will say, as you said, double-edged sword. But at the end of the day, having worked in the business for almost, was it 40 years now? Jesus. Yeah, 45 years.
Yeah, I'm 38, so you're...
Yeah, 45 years in the business. Yeah. I actually have pensions with the WGA and DGA that will help me retire. Not till I always thought, I didn't even know about it. I didn't even realize, I didn't think about it. I'm like, I'm going to work till I fall over dead, especially gig work where you're like, I don't know if I'm going to work for you. Yeah. So that's, I do.
You're working in the gig economy. Yeah. Gig young, gig. I can't think of any other gigs.
I know. Gig it goes Hawaiian.
Gig it.
Gig it.
Wait till you've seen my gig it.
You want it for a Valentine. We're not old that we can both, off the top of our heads, sing the Gidget theme song.
Yeah.
I like
if you're in doubt about angels being real.
Wait, so the Gidget in the movies was Sally Field?
No, Gidget on TV was Sally Field. Gidget
that's right.
Gidget in the movies was Princess Leia's mom.
No, it wasn't Carrie Fisher.
No, Princess Leia's mom, Debbie Reynolds.
Oh. No, it was not Debbie Reynolds.
Well, who the heck was it? I thought it was. I'm wrong.
No. Debbie Reynolds was too old to play Gidget.
Yeah, you're right. Hold on.
It was Debbie Reynolds' mom, Carrie Fisher's mom. Yeah. You're thinking of a little film called Singing in the Rain. Wasn't it? It was
Sandra Dee. Sorry,
Sandra Dee. Yeah. We look at me. I'm Sandra Dee.
Yeah, you got to immediately go to the Grease.
So when you started this whole thing with talking about Jeannie versus Samantha, which brings me to the Gilligan versus Skipper. Marianne versus Jen. I wonder gay bar. Gilligan? Are you a Gilligan or a Skipper?
You're a Skipper.
Yeah, I am a Skipper. Ginger or Marianne?
I love Marianne.
I was a Ginger guy. Well, there you go. We can be friends on the island, not fight over the same girl.
Yeah.
I thought Ginger. I just loved
an occasional bout with Ginger would be interesting. I have to say.
You know what's crazy? Growing up in LA, Tina Louise dated the headmaster of the school I went to. So
Wow.
this was in the 70s. So she was still a looker.
Sure.
And yeah, she would show up on campus sometimes because he lived on campus, one of those old private schools where the headmaster lived.
I wonder if he was
near campus. But I'm not touching that with my 10-foot pole.
but you're thinking it now.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, that was kind of interesting. It was weird. You tell people don't grow up in LA, like, oh yeah, the headmaster of our school
dated Ginger.
Dating Ginger, yeah. But the Jeannie Samantha one, I've never thought of like. I think. Well, Jeannie was definitely, what is it? Kiss, kill, marry.
Yeah,
the dirty version of that. Yeah, marry Samantha.
F marry kill.
F marry kill. Yeah, definitely F.
As opposed to F marry Abraham.
But I don't swing that way, but I'm sure he's a lovely guy. Yeah, marry Sam, F Jeannie, kill Endora.
Though, Agnes Moorehead had a reputation.
Yes,
along with oh man, yeah. See, along with all these memories, you have all these gaps.
You mean Grace Lee Whitney?
No,
I did hear she had a reputation as well. And Angelique Pettyjohn did. Are you the one who told me she did softcore porn? And you can find it? Yeah.
Yes.
I was like, damn, I wish I knew. Well, yeah, I guess I didn't know it as a kid.
I'll send you one.
No, you can find them online. I Googled her and like, oh, there it is. I mean, they're really, 70s like nudie pictures.
Not this one.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. No wonder they hired her.
Not that I'm a collector or anything.
No,
I'm
no.
really not. It's only for my Trexpert qualification that I needed to have it.
The thralls of Triskelion. I remember meeting her at a con in the 70s, maybe early 80s. And she was just, she looked like 20 miles of tough road. And, she was still, you could see, well, she didn't look like beat up, but she just looked haggard.
Well, she at one point was very close to marrying Elvis.
Oh, wow.
So she's been around.
Again, Hollywood kid, a friend of mine I went to school with, his mom dated Elvis. Same thing. Elvis got around. That's not like,
oh, yeah.
It's not like three women. Yeah,
that's not a rarity.
But his mom was a looker, and she dated Elvis Parsley.
But he did say thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Elvis loves you. I dated a girl, and I would whisper in her ear as Elvis, and she would get chills and giggle and kind of basically fall apart. It was pretty funny.
How old was she? 60?
No, she was in her 20s. Just that Elvis voice. That was kind of a little bushy, sluzzy thing going on right there. It made her all giggly and mushy.
In my private life, I like to dress very conservatively, but when I'm on stage, I like to be as flashy as possible.
As fleshy as possible.
No, not fleshy. My goodness.
So you had asked, but right before we started recording this.
Yeah, it's one of the questions.
I've thought about it my whole life. Yeah.
No, it's one of the questions that they would ask on inside the Actors Studio, right. Which was from Bouillon de Couture, a French television show. And what's your favorite curse word? What's your what's your worst least favorite word? But one of the questions is, if you couldn't do what you wound up doing, what would you do in your life?
Who would you do?
What would you do?
I would do Jeannie. Well, you go first. You go first.
Ask. Very
dangerous. You go first.
We might have talked about this a little bit before, but I had a crossroad in my life in my senior year of high school of whether I was going to go into music or film, for lack of a better term.
As a musician, as a player of an instrument.
Yeah, yeah. Because I played clarinet and saxophone and a little bit of
Do
piano, and
you dabble anymore?
occasionally, but it makes my embouchure ache. My lips aren't strong enough anymore.
I think you're doing it wrong.
Read into that what you will.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, Mom, I think I heard my embouchure.
but I actually about a year or so ago I got together with a friend of mine who also played clarinet in high school, and we got together and I had some old sheet music and we played clarinet for a couple hours and it was a lot of fun.
I love clarinet.
But it beat the crap out of my lips.
I'll talk like this for a couple days.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the sharpness of your teeth
Yeah.
digs into your bottom lip, and your top lip gets achy. But yeah, I was going back and forth as to what I wanted to go into. I think I made the correct choice because I don't think I would have had the
Talk about a gig economy, being a clarinetist.
well, totally. But I would have had to expand that.
Yeah, your repertoire.
And like my brother made that decision. He went the other way. He became a professional musician, and he plays trombone and all the brass instruments, and he teaches music at a college and high school level as well. But so he took that road, and that is where I would have been.
Was anyone in your adult family, like your uncle or father or mother, musical? Was music part of your childhood?
It was. Well, my dad played clarinet, and he had his clarinet, and he would get it out and play. And so when it came time for me to, decide whether or not to play an instrument, and what was it, fourth grade, I said I would like to play the clarinet because my dad already has one.
Well, man,
yeah,
interesting. I dabbled in music. I had no patience. I know that's surprising considering how calm I am all the time.
Right.
My dad played piano. He played classical piano fairly well too. We had a baby grand piano growing up. My brother inherited it because he
what did it grow up into?
Well, a full grand piano,
adult grand piano.
Oh, exactly. Now it's a grandfather piano. It was a beautiful Mason and Hamlin, built in like I think literally my grandparents bought it for my dad or something to learn on it.
Were your baby grandparents?
Yes, my baby grandparents. So it had been in the family. It's still in the family. So it's been in the family over 100 years at this point. Anyway, I thought about music, but I had no. And when you said not, because I mean art, I thought about being an illustrator. I thought about being, all the things I've done: acting, writing songs, singer of songs. The only thing I loved as a kid, being spectrumy as hell, I just read science encyclopedias, and I loved animals. I loved animals because of my autistic nature. I would sit really quietly, and the stray cats would come to me, and the squirrels, and I would just sit there really quiet and just, and had a vibe with animals. So I thought about not being a veterinarian, but I loved marine mammals. I loved ocean. I loved being in the water. So marine biologist was very interesting to me.
So the stray cats came by you, and what about the Doobie Brothers?
No, the Doobies stayed. I didn't really have much truck with that kind of nonsense, but the stray cats would strut on by.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would go to Marine World, and which was much closer than SeaWorld here in LA. It was in Palos Verdes Peninsula, and I remember you could go swim in the big tank. And I got as soon as I left home, I got my scuba license. I'd already at that point decided to work in the film business, and two things swayed me. One was I talked to somebody who was I'm trying to remember who it was now, but someone when I was a teenager was in biology, and they were like, well, there's no money in it. They said, and they said, if you like dissecting animals, and he said, there's not, you don't get to play with dolphins. John Lilly did that because he was rich and, made his money off drugs.
Yeah.
He said,
so you didn't talk to Dr. Fauci?
I did not talk to Dr. Fauci. But everything else, like the other thing, I thought so that was sort of a thing as a kid. I've always thought it would be fun to be a children's book illustrator, which is writing and doing art, but it isn't, in the media.
Yeah, yeah.
So it is somewhat related, but that in fact, as I consider, semi-retiring, that's one of the things I thought about doing is and with AI, even doing little short films based on my weird, funny, silly ideas, things that made Jim Henson and I get along.
Yeah.
I miss that. The Muppets, I think the Muppets have been taken over by people with no imagination. And so everything's like, well, Kermit Piggy getting married, or this is my rant I give to anybody. It's like the Muppets aren't fun anymore. They're not silly. They're not whimsical. They're characters written by television show writers who make sure that the arcs are, like, oh God, really? Why are you doing it with puppets? Do that with, Seth Rogen and Jim Carrey, and that they're great. People are really good at that. The reason Jim Henson always said, if you can do it with actors, don't do it with puppets. And that's the problem is they hire writers who write for actors.
We need Gonzo to have reasonable motivation.
Right. Literally, like I would come up with stuff and go, that's weird. I'm like, yes.
Yeah, it's supposed to be.
They'd forgotten what made them successful. The Muppet Show was 30% story and 70%, nonsense and silliness and gags and songs, singers and songs. And they just don't, because
I've been taught
Hollywood doesn't really love creative people. They like factory workers, TV, I should say. Movies.
They like product. They don't like where it comes from.
Right. Well, no, they want product that's proven. They're not gonna. If it was a restaurant, they would go, this snail omelet you're pitching, not gonna sell. It's like, well, you haven't tried it. Yeah, people don't want to eat snails, but snails are good if you cook them right. It's like
they're not wrong.
Well, that's why you never see a snail omelet, even in a French restaurant. But the Muppets, that's what made the Muppets great, was snail omelets. They just did this weird stuff. And, not that that's 100% what it was. And it's funny. And it also is the way I vibed with him. I didn't give a crap about, Kermit Piggy to me was a funny little backstage thing. That's not what the show was about.
No.
The movie banked on it, but the movie, only people are like, oh, the Muppet movie is so successful because it had 5 years of a hit TV series.
Yeah, right.
If you did a Friends movie without having Friends, it would flop. But if after 7 years, Friends Go Hawaiian or whatever, you'd make $1 billion back in the day.
Yeah. Friends, the next generation would not work.
Friend babies. So I think that whimsy, that silliness, that, the Ogden Nash and the those kind of guys who wrote those silly poems and things that I love. And Jerry Jewell, the writer for the Muppets, was also a big fan. Hilaire Belloc and Ogden Nash and all these guys who wrote great, funny, silly stuff for kids, or just for anyone who liked whimsical. I miss that, and so one thing I would like to do is, and I even thought of a book just noodling around in the car with my girlfriend. And it's just a dumb thing where you flip some letters around, but the bite of the flumblebee. The whole idea is that the bite of the flumblebee makes you silly. You get the giggles. And it sounds like a great children's book.
I love that.
Yeah, they do big fat flumblebees and what they are, and the kids get the giggles. And
I'm a flumblebee.
Exactly. I'm a flumblebee. And I'm going to bite you now. I don't know why it sounds like Georgie Jessel.
Because most things do.
Yeah. So that
bumblebees have no teeth, which is the funny part.
Right, exactly.
They gum you. But
that's careful. Are you a fan of Craig Ferguson?
I love Craig Ferguson.
Yeah, he was what I loved about him and his talk show was that he was always on the edge of naughty.
Yes.
And that's what's charming. And I love that. And I love his stand-up. And he has a great podcast.
Yes.
Where he interviews people, and become a huge fan of that.
Yeah.
But that sensibility was somewhat imbued, not so much the naughtiness, a little bit of it in the Muppets because it was done in England.
Right.
Where one of the, two of the writers were British and had that kind of edgier silliness that most American sitcoms lack, that whimsy that the Brits are good at. And I don't know why culturally is it the Christian Protestant, things need to be logical. You need to toe the line, and that's just silly. I don't know because
I think it might stem for the fear of the naughty boy.
mm,
Uh,
the
the
fear of
sort of
being or
no, it's sort of it's not anti-male, but it's looking down at the male perspective of things,
mm,
and that's where that comes from. That's the naughty boy, misbehaving
right.
and and having a laugh at others' expense sometimes. And I
Right.
think that may have something to do with it culturally. I'm not sure.
Well, it's funny because I mean I've talked about this with friends, comedy writers. British sitcoms are way edgier. I mean, look at just The
Yes,
Office. Look at the American
yes,
version,
yes.
and partially I think it's because the British culture, which is obviously close to ours, but they're on an island and they're all very civil to each
Right,
other because they have to be because they live on top of each other. Where in
right.
America, you can go out and not see anybody if you want for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
So we don't have. There's no frisson of being a jerk. There's no like everyone's just a jerk because they
Rick
can be. Like,
Russon.
yeah, but in England, if you're a jerk, you can get yourself, excised pretty quickly,
Yeah.
culturally. Where here, you can be a jerk and then just go fuck off to
Hmm.
wherever. And so I think they get a kick out of A, jerkiness, and then B, because they're all on an island and inbred, they're the whimsiest. They're slowly going mad. I don't know. But it
Yeah.
is funny and like I'm a noises off and the play that goes wrong. You
Right.
could never make that here. I mean, they brought it over here.
Well, they've made it here, but it hasn't.
Well, no,
They haven't really made it here.
right. Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. You have to be a fan of it. I went and saw them. I met the guys who did it. I saw the original run in London, how many years ago, and then they came out and they did Peter Pan here, which was hilarious, at the Dorothy Chandler or somewhere in the Music Center there,
Yeah.
and met
I want
got
to
to
see
hang out.
something at the Raymond Chandler Pavilion.
The audience
A
walked
lot
in.
more, gunshots.
The audience walked into the theater like a.
They they
Like a
they,
thing
they stank like a 4:30.
commuter train down to New York. Anyway, yeah. So that's I guess children's book illustrator, writer, and then yeah, marine biologist got or scientist in that way got. An inventor. I think that would be the other thing.
Hmm.
That's what I loved about making props and sets and creature stuff is like you're
Yeah.
inventing stuff. Again, we talked about this a couple times ago about how it's all been done now. You buy software to do it. We're used to have to figure out how to make this shit.
Hmm.
How are we going to blow up this space? What's the spaceship?
Well, the great thing about doing stuff for movies and TV is that you can invent something without having to worry about it hurting anybody.
Yes, or last.
Yeah. Yeah.
But and now it's all, especially with software and AI and everything. It's just sort of like I mean the idea part's still fun, the ideation, but figuring. I remember I would make creature controls just out of soldering brass rods and copper plates
Sure.
and cutting it and making eyes and
You
mouths
said
and
rod.
rod. And I love that. And just inventing, I think, not the invention, an inventor is a career, I guess it is. But 3D printing is fascinating to me too. Just that you can pretty much come up with anything and then just make it. It's bordering on the what's the thing in Star Trek, the food generator. You just punch
The
it
replicator.
in. Replicate. Yeah. That's funny. Star Trek actually never considered 3D printing. At least not in the episodes I ever saw. Not in the
Well, they never showed it. They never showed it in operation. But at least remember, there weren't any replicators in original series. That only
that was
in TNG.
right.
But I think in terms of it basically being a fancy little transporter, it sort of works in the same way,
right?
In theory.
A little more analog, but yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of analogs, have you been keeping up with the new quantum computer that they've built? that looks like a Rube Gold. I mean, it looks like a steampunk thing. It's got lots of little tubes and copper rings. All just, it's amazing. And
It's interesting because there's a representation like that in the TV show Devs.
Oh, I never saw it. I mean, I heard of it. I never watched it.
It's on Hulu. Watch it. It's fascinating.
But
they have this amazing, powerful quantum computer that is in its own building that basically can look into the past and the future.
This is what's weird.
But it looks exactly like that.
Really, with just and like weird rings and stacks.
Yeah.
What's interesting is, and I haven't listened to much of any of the details about it, but they said that scientists are freaked out because they turned this thing on.
And they don't really know how it works.
Well, no, they don't know what's coming through. In other words, it's not just answering their questions. Things are coming through, or things are happening that it's not programmed to be doing. In other words, if you turn
unpredictable outcomes.
If you just turn on your computer and it says hello, and you're like, what? Not today it would, but I don't know. I know they just said there's weird things happening. And also they're saying that it proves that time travel is possible. And I'm not exactly sure why.
Well, it's that old joke where they build this huge computer, and the first thing they ask it is there a God? And it calculates for a couple minutes, and it says, there is now.
It's interesting. I'm not as terrified of AI, probably because I don't know. See all the Sam Altman things, like Sam Altman we've made a huge mistake. And I know it's all clickbait too, but
yeah.
And then there's other people saying, don't worry about AI. It's not going to destroy us. It's
right.
You unplug it. And I'm like, yeah, that's what I thought. I mean, it's not like a science fiction thing where it's planting itself in everyone's phone. So if you unplug the big supercomputer, then all the phones will get together and recreate it.
Yeah.
It's a good science fiction idea, actually. But I remember the Colossus, the Forbin project.
Sure.
And that's what kind of they're hinting at, is like, well, it's gonna get its fingers out there. I mean, AI is fascinating to me, not terrifying.
Or terabiting.
Or the bite of the flumblebee.
I love that. I want to see that.
All right. Well, it's one of the things I have. That's okay. Talking about semi-retirement and things I do. One of the things that really excites me about AI is it helping me to produce the 70 ideas I have in some form or another, even if it's like a short film or sketches or art, because I just couldn't possibly sit and draw all this stuff out.
Right.
And then you kind of
could, but you're lazy.
I'm as lazy as lazy can be. Well, also I hate my skill set. I'm not good enough for my own taste. So that it's not that I'm lazy. I just frustrated. Like I remember I took oil painting and I got pretty decent at it. And then it turns out oil painting is not a skill needed in the entertainment business unless you want to just do oil paintings.
Right. Unless you can time travel.
Unless you can time travel. And the thing about it that I liked is it's all shades of gray. Like you can just do, very graphic stuff with it. I mean, I assume though, like
nudes.
Like nudes. No. The pop artists, they used it very much like graphic, like, oh God.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So I assume they were using acrylic, but so my drawings are very sketchy, like Heinrich Clay or even Peter de Sèvres, who kind of paints with a pencil, not drawing. It's not Mobius, which is a clean, empty line.
You were thinking of Mondrian.
And also
that other guy.
The other guy, not Warhol.
No.
My dad was in the military with him.
Really?
Roy Lichtenstein.
Roy Lichtenstein, yeah.
My dad, I remember I had moved to New York. I thought I shared this maybe with the live conversation on the show. I moved to New York. I was living there working at Henson. And I remember I was at a bar. I was talking to a guy and he said his name, we're about the same age. His name was Lichtenstein. I'm like, oh my God, no relation to Roy, right? He goes, yeah, that's my father. I'm like, wait, seriously? He goes, yeah. No, I'm like, that's amazing. It's New York. I shouldn't have been that shocked, but cool.
Because, my father knew your father.
Well, no, I didn't know that till I told my folks. The call home. And I said, I met Roy Lichtenstein's son. And my parents were not fans of art in general. Definitely not modern art. But my dad goes, I knew a Roy Lichtenstein, and we were in the GIs, in World War II together. I'm like, really? I said, he's a famous artist. And he goes, really? He's kind of an oddball.
That's him. That's the
Yeah.
one.
I said, it's probably him. He goes, yeah, he would do little doodles and stuff. But he
Oh
just
my
seemed
God.
like a duck.
Yeah, I got a couple of them over here.
Yeah. Wait, seriously? We did. My family did. My grandmother my grandmother had pretty good taste in art and collectibles. She had a beautiful tonalist piece, which was all grays and greens, and it was a shepherd walking down a road in a very foggy green, like eucalyptus grove, very loose, beautiful painting. My mom always admired it. So my grandmother passed away. She gave it to it was in the will that my mother would get it.
Yeah.
And my mother had it hanging, I think, in their bedroom. And I always loved that piece. And so when my parents moved, my mom was very much like, it didn't really go with anything. And she said, should we sell it? I said, oh, I'd love that. I'll take it. It would be perfect in my house. I have all gray greens and kind of arts and crafts, but not kind of, very arts and crafts influence. So it hung in my living room. And she always called it the Australian painting because it was a guy herding sheep, and she thought it was an Australian artist. So I was at an arts and crafts or a plein air painting show of, classic plein air painters. It was a very Californian kind of thing.
Yeah.
And there was a companion piece to the piece I had. And the artist's name was Granville Redmond. And it turns out he was huge in the plein. It would be like having a Monet of the plein air, of the California plein air painters.
For those who don't know, plein air painting is basically painting outside.
Painting outside, but there was a California version of it because California, lots of poppies and beautiful mountains and eucalyptus trees, because California, this was all the turn of the century, the turn of the previous century. And so they were coming out here to take the air and paint the beautiful vistas that they didn't see on the East Coast. And so this guy, Granville Redmond, was one of the masters of that. And
what a great name.
Yeah. And so I looked it up, and it turned out this piece we had was worth a lot of money. And so I took it to a guy who sold plein air art, and he looked at it and he said, yeah, no, that is a Granville Redmond. It's actually exactly matches the series he did of guys herding sheep in the forest. And so he cleaned it up for me. And then when I didn't work for 2 years, I said, hey, is this something that you would sell? And he said, yeah, I know buyers who would be interested. And you know who bought it?
Joe Johnson.
No, nobody I knew.
Oh.
Barbara Streisand bought it. She was a huge art collector. Yeah. For a pretty penny, it saved my ass. It got the reason I kept my house as long as I did.
That's awesome.
Yeah. It was crazy. But it's just weird. It was one of those stories like, oh yeah, that old painting that hangs in the attic.
Well, it was either her or Steve Martin.
No, Steve wouldn't buy it. He buys modern art. This was not modern.
Yeah, he buys a lot of stuff.
He buys Rothkos. I love the guy, but I want to sit down and have dinner with him and talk about what is it about Pollock and those Rothko that you think is worth millions of dollars?
We were talking about things that got cut out of movies that I worked on.
Yeah.
When I was on What About Bob, there was a whole secondary storyline about Bob's mother, who was a fine modern artist.
Oh.
And so I was asked to do a whole bunch of rip-off modern art, and I did a Rothko, and I did a Pollock, and I did a bunch of others. Basically just riffing off of reference that we had.
Right.
And it was hilarious because we were going to make them big, and I was going to paint them big on canvas.
Oh man!
And then one day they said, "Oh yeah, no, that's cut out now."
Yeah. In Muppet, Very Merry Muppet Christmas, Joan Cusack's character was in this I said I wanted her office to look like just cement walls, those polished cement walls, very cold, very sterile.
Yeah.
And I said it would be great if they had a big Rothko hanging there, just 3. And so my production designer, I've shared this story, maybe not here, said, oh yeah, I got a guy. And I'm like, what? He goes, actually, he paints modern art for rich people he matches them so they can keep the real one in a
Oh,
vault
that's funny.
and hang that in the house. So if anyone thinks they're going to run off with it, they're not. And
That's
I'm like,
hilarious.
you're kidding. And I go, what does he charge? He goes, oh, like, if he's doing a Rothko, I'll probably charge him $15,000, which is a penny, is nothing.
Yeah.
And he can crank them out.
And it's one can of paint.
Yeah. 3 colors, though. So yeah, this guy does that besides being a painter for the movie business and doing probably scenic, he would do this for wealthy people. He would get detailed photographs and copy them down to the point where, unless you were, if you're having a party and people are looking at your Monet, they don't know that your Monet is actually in a vault somewhere, and they're looking at a perfect reproduction.
Well, forging art has long time been a job that you might take if you hadn't gotten into the entertainment industry.
I think I'm too scared to break a law. I was raised with the rigid hand of justice. I'm sure someone would find me out. But yeah, there's a great documentary on some great forgers.
Well, there's a section of Orson Welles' movie F for Fake.
Yes.
That is amazing. And it follows this guy in Spain who would just go around making forgeries, and he had a whole
Picassos were a specialty, I believe.
Yeah.
I mean, but that's one of those things. Here's what's funny: NFTs, if you remember that from.
I do.
Like, to me, that was just forgeries had become the new art.
It's forgeries for people who are too lazy to paint.
But it's the purchasing of it. Like, look, Picasso's fine and Rothko's fine. The fact that they're worth millions of dollars, and I get them historically. Like, that's the only way I can wrap my head around it.
Right.
Rothko, Pollock was the first guy to dribble all over a canvas and go, it's art.
If you're buying a code number,
yes,
that only represents this thing,
it's a JPEG. You're buying a JPEG.
It's ludicrous. Yeah,
it was. I mean, talk about art swindle. But there's a book about how the CIA, and this is common knowledge in art circles, that the CIA promoted modern art to show up the Russians. There's a whole book about it.
That's fascinating because it makes sense.
Well, then you're like, wait a minute. The CIA was manipulating taste. Oh yeah, culture.
Well, they do today.
There's culture wars. Yeah, no, I know. I mean, it's like fish and water. Like, I didn't realize, I knew about like Project Mockingbird and all that, where they would control the news, and that makes sense to skew the politics or skew the culture. But to do art seemed like, I was just kind of amazed that they would, and to do it to just kind of win the culture war of like Russian art was, fuddy-duddy and musty and old, where this was
representational BS.
And this is cool and modern, and making people like Andy Warhol was basically a nutcase.
Yeah.
He'd take a picture and do colors on it, and now he's a millionaire. Which just brings the whole modern art, or not even modern, just art in general, world into question.
Oh yeah,
and knowing it's as much bullshit in that industry as there is in the film business.
Well, it's the people who I hesitate to say, who don't really know what they're looking at, who buy things because it's popular, quote.
Well, and
it's the emperor's new clothes.
Well, it's a good investment. It's funny, Alan Funt, to bring up an old name.
Alan Funt, who created Candid Camera.
Candid Camera, and he talked like he always
looked like this, and we thought it would be funny.
Exactly.
Put 4,000 volts through this fork in the pancake house.
Well, no, he made
see what happens.
I was dying to see as a kid called "What Do You Say to a Naked Lady?"
Right,
and that was the gag. He would have completely nude women like answer the door.
This was the movie they did.
The movie they did, yeah, it was an adult, an R-rated movie, but it was Alan Funt, and he was a bald little funny man, very New York, and he would say, "We thought it would be funny to have a nude woman selling cupcakes or be in an elevator." Like, literally, it was just like put a naked woman in a busy New York elevator, and people go in, and she's just naked and not. And just we saw their reactions, and their people were like, "Oh," and just kind of like, "Oh," and that was a whole thing. That that was before Housewives.
Many of them were aghast.
Anyway, he loved a British painter named Alma Tadema.
Hmm.
Was a master of a realistic art, and kind of the what era would he be? He was a realist. He did a lot of paintings of Romans and marble and
Right.
beautiful tableau. Oh God, what was the name of that style? Neo Romantics. Anyway, it was it was the late 1800s.
Right.
Waterhouse, Alma Tadema, Rossetti. Anyway, these amazing painters.
Yeah.
And he loved this guy stuff. They were giving it away. Like he was buying it for $2,000 in musty old art galleries because people thought it was crap.
Right.
Because they were climbing over themselves for Kandinsky's and Clays and
Yeah.
Cleese and Picasso's and de Koonings and all that. And what's funny is in the early 80s or by the 90s, suddenly people are like, wow, that guy could really paint. And his collection, which he probably spent, in 70s, 60s dollars, 50s dollars, maybe $40,000, $50,000, was suddenly worth millions and millions.
Right.
And I guess he donated, or his estate donated a lot of them back to museums. But if you're interested in that sort of realistic, romantic art, Alma Tadema cannot be beat.
Yeah, I mean it's very like the sort of mid-century and previously commercial artists.
Yes, like Leyendecker, the guys who did Saturday.
Yeah, and Sunbloom and all those guys who
amazing.
Did amazing paintings for commercial for advertisements.
Well, for Frank Frazetta was kind of the end of that, using it in fantasy, and they would paint on cardboard, like a cardstock, because it just had to last to get photographed, and that's it. Yeah, I think Rockwell is one of the few that actually sold his beautiful canvases.
Right,
but he's kind of on a dust heap now too, unless you're an actual illustrator or an artist.
Right.
All those guys. I mean, going back to Dean Rockwell and Cornwell. I mean, Dean Cornwell.
Dean Cornwell
and
Rockwell, Norman Rockwell. Yeah,
Norman Rockwell, and God, there's so many. Well, and then Wyeth, and then the son of Wyeth and son of Wyeth, NC and Jamie Wyeth. Anyway, so many amazing. I books, this thick on American illustrators, and remember the I don't know if they do it anymore. The Illustrators Annual.
Yes. Yeah.
I think I have like 20 of them from starting around 1978 to probably about 1998. I would buy it every year, the Illustrators Annual. I still have them. They're amazing to look through.
Yeah, like the year in illustration.
Yeah, but and they would have a juried show in New York at the Society of Illustrators. And I remember when I was living there, I would go there and just ogle the amazing paintings by people who. And it's funny. There's like a cycle. Robert McGinnis was like one of the most amazing paperback cover artists, and then movie poster artists like Drew Struzan was probably the last of the great movie poster illustrators. And that whole world has just kind of fallen away. I mean, paperback covers, album covers. There's no or very little public space for that skill set to be demonstrated.
Well, Photoshop killed it.
Well, but also there is no album cover. I mean, album covers were 12-inch.
There are no albums.
Well, that's what I mean. CD covers were this big, and now you just download it or you hear it on Spotify. So the public venue to see that kind of illustration. I mean, just even greeting cards kind of have. I mean, they're still around, but remember. Charlie White III and Drew Street and Paper Moon Graphics.
Yeah,
and they did amazing. There a lot of airbrush came back in the 70s. Airbrush illustration again with like album cover art and the work of Albert Vargas. Alberto Vargas was brought back. Alberto, the pinup artist. George Petty, Alberto Vargas. It's funny talking about this, like all these names that I don't even bandy about.
I haven't used them in ages.
Yeah. And I don't know what illustrators do now. I mean, the ones I know are like Peter DeSev, and he mainly works as an animation in the industry doing character designs, and he does the New Yorker covers when he can. everyone else is trying to do children's books or something. There's just it's weird. That was the thing I first thought I wanted to do, was be an illustrator. And I have this encyclopedic memory of all these names because I just would pour over their works, and I have all these monographs.
You and George Lucas.
Yes, I know. When I went to the ranch and saw that he had Frazettas and Rockwells, I'm like, oh my God. I mean, no wonder, Star Wars vibrates more than just like, oh, it's a fun movie. Like he was pulled from the same cloth. I mean, we're only probably 20 years apart.
Yeah.
I don't know, how old is George now? He's got to be in his 80s.
Well, he was 33 in 77. So.
Okay. So there you go.
I think he just turned 80.
80, yeah.
Or 82.
Yeah. So we're the same age. I mean, we're 20 years apart.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. Yeah. Yeah. 77, I was 15.
Yeah, but he wanted to be an illustrator, and his dad didn't want to pay for him to go to art center.
Go to art center, yeah. I wanted to go to art center. I couldn't afford it. My parents were like, they
I had no urge to go to art center, and I wound up teaching there.
That's amazing, yeah. Well, what was funny was I learned oil painting because my dad's secretary was a Sunday oil painter, and she had little ladies, the housewives who had free Sundays. After church, they would come over to her house in her garage and paint still lives. And I was painting like portraits of Obi-Wan and skulls with eyeballs, and they loved it. They're like, oh, that's so creative. And
nice.
And she would say, well, to paint the eyeball, to give it the depth, you want to round it and you want to do a reflect. Right. I mean, it was funny. For her, it was just another painting lesson.
Yeah.
But that's how I learned to paint. So when I told my folks, I'd really like to go to art center, and it was like $40,000 a year in 1978, 79. And he said, you getting art lessons from Billy. That was the name of his assistant. It was like $10 on a Sunday. Like, I'm not paying that. You can get a good education at UCLA. They have an art department. He wasn't angry about it. He's just like, I'm sorry. If artists are, he's the one who said all artists are bums.
Well, he's not wrong.
But we're lovable bums. The love bums.
The love bums.
Exciting.
Herbie the love bum.
Again, bordering on naughty boy humor. Yeah. Disney. Trying to think of anything interesting they've put out that isn't a sequel or a redux of or reboot of something they've done previously.
Not for a while.
I know. I was talking to someone in their 20s about like, why did they make all these cool movies in the 80s? And like, because originality was still considered the coin of the realm, not it's going to make $1 billion.
And the corporations hadn't yet learned how to put their thumb down.
Right. Well, because it wasn't. There were like 30 movie companies, not 5, owned by I mean, there was Orion and Columbia and MGM, and I mean, but are we going to list them all? And then and then Roger Corman and AIP and
Canon.
Canon. But American International made the Beach Blanket movies and those goofy horror movies, and they just knew they made movies. That was what movies. They did. And they wanted an original idea. Now it's like, that's weird. I mean, they're independent films, but again, budget is probably part of the concern, but also, I don't know. I mean, all the live action movies this Oscars I hadn't seen, and I saw Nora one, and I looked up what it was about. I'm like, oh, it's like a TV movie. I'm sure it's lovely and the acting's great, but
I don't want to watch that. I've lived it.
Wait, you were a Russian hooker, or no?
I was a Russian hooker.
Wait, was she a hooker who marries a Russian oligarch's son?
Yeah.
And well, how is that fascinating? Like, oh, okay.
I don't know, unless there's a big twist or something.
Yeah, she's a robot. That's what that's why I like science fiction kids, not romance novels. I see these things. The joke is the names of these movies too is like Wednesday Never Comes, The Night Monkey,
The Night Monkey.
Brothers and Sisters, Yellow is for Sunday. These names are like Honora. Okay. I don't hate them. I'm happy.
No, just give me a reason to watch your movie.
Yeah.
Please, I'm begging for one.
And that's, well, like everything else in our country right now, it's either a $200 million movie or a $2 million movie.
Yeah, yeah.
And so the stuff that lived in between, like Gremlins was made for I think like $8 million.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe that. I remember the budget for all the Gremlins was $1 million,
right?
And that was $1983.
Yeah.
And I remember Gremlins 2 that Rick Baker did 7 years later, or 8 years later, was $10 million for the Gremlins. Yeah, Chris will never let him live that down. And I might be bending the numbers a little bit, but it was pretty much that level.
Oh, I don't know if I told you, I finally met Rick Baker last month.
Oh, where were you?
We were at a gathering for our mutual friend Bob Burns. We occasionally go to lunch.
I saw that.
And say hi to Bob, who is
how's he doing?
He's doing okay. He's approaching 90.
I know.
And he's his health is not good. He's at a care home.
Yeah.
But occasionally our friends bring him out, and we have
Blue Zudivern there.
Sometimes he wasn't there.
I know he's one of the close. He lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he lived right across from him.
Yeah, for a while.
But I finally met Rick Baker, and I bought him soup.
You're a lovely man.
I am.
He's, what a nutty funster.
You know what? He was very sweet.
No, he is a lovely guy. He's very quiet. He's very circumspect. Once you get to know him, he can be goofy as hell. But yeah. But no, Rick is a sweet. He's always been very kind to me. And Craig Reardon also was always very. He's the first professional makeup artist that talked to me on the phone and gave me some ideas, and then worked together on up at ILM like 5 years later. Well, it's a crazy world we live in. So you're gonna you should play. I'll do an oil painting of you playing the clarinet, and we'll both live
we'll live our alternate lives.
Alternate lives, yeah. We'll both be rich.
Right.
The richest clarinet player in the world. So, who, as clarinet players, was there one that you're like, that guy? He made me, a Goodman or a Biederbeck, or I don't know who's the.
Not especially. I mean, obviously Benny Goodman could play anything.
Sure. Yeah.
And he played classical as well as jazz, and he had a unique sound to him.
Did he? I don't know clarinet enough to know that I can spot a Benny Goodman tune, only because I know it's Benny Goodman playing.
Yeah. No, he had a specific sound because he had a strange embouchure that curled both lips over both sets of teeth.
So yeah, more buzzing,
more mellow. A mellow sound.
Yeah, it was very mellow.
Yeah. And Artie Shaw was also a great clarinetist.
Was Bix Biederbeck, was he a clarinetist?
Wasn't Bix Biederbeck a...
was he a drummer? I don't know. I know the name. I always thought in my head he was a...
I thought he was a harmonica player.
Oh, I don't know.
I'm not sure. Again, my mind is not my own. But obviously, one of our viewers will let me know about that.
So so Goodman. What about Kay Kaiser?
I never listened to.
He's another band leader. I think he played. I love that. There was a whole nother era that I only know through old movies and records.
Yeah,
but it's definitely the era of my parents.
Yeah, the big band era with all these.
The band leader.
Yeah, I mean, dance bands were huge.
Yeah, but also just easy listening on the radio. Here's Kay Kaiser and his College of Musical Knowledge, and there was there was Kay Kaiser, and then there was Spike Jones with their kind of comedy.
Right.
The boys were doing shenanigans, and they had Ish Kabibble and what was the other guy? Ish Kabibble was, I think that was part of Spike Jones. Oh, Doodles Weaver.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, Doodles and Ish. Actually, that should be a good kid. There's a kid's book right there. Doodles and Ish.
Wow.
All right. We bored
it reminds me of Albert Brooks's dad. You know about Albert Brooks's dad.
No, I know that Albert Brooks is Albert Einstein, and his brother is.
Yes. Well, he went by the name Park Your Carcass.
Oh, that was Park Your Carcass.
Yeah. He's Bob Einstein and Albert Einstein's dad.
Wow.
And he died basically on stage at a roast. He presented his roast material. He went and sat down, and he died right there.
I've heard that.
Yeah.
There's a couple famous. Well, Dick Shawn died on
Dick Shawn died on stage, and people didn't know.
People didn't know because the 20 minutes they sat laughing and applauding. Yeah. Someone went and checked on him. And then very famous British comic, like one of the last guy who died in, I think, 80s or 90s, in the 80s or 90s, and possibly in his 80s. He died on stage, and there's film of it.
Mm.
You can see it on YouTube. What's his name? Again, I don't
remember.
No, he's very, very silly, very vaudevillian or like music hall kind of comic. Yeah. If you're British, I'm sure you're screaming at the podcast right now.
Right.
But yeah, there's film of him. He had baggy pants and funny hair, and he just goes, oh, and falls over, kind of crumples down on stage. And I was like, oh,
and the crowd goes wild.
The crowd laughs, and then I don't know if they cut it for time. Suddenly someone runs out and checks him. Goes, is there a doctor? And and you're like, holy crap.
It's a good way to go for a performer.
Yeah. Have any musicians died to the sound of applause? Any musicians died on stage playing?
Not that I know of.
Yeah, you'd think that would be a famous
yeah.
I just read that Shannon Hoon from Blind Melon came out on stage buck naked and peed on the audience at one point.
Oh, how nice.
And was arrested. I'm like, well, he didn't die, but his career did.
Well, it's it's good for the people in the expensive seats. Get a little extra bonus.
People thought he was in some naked bodysuit, and he was buck naked and peed on the audience.
Wow, how nice! Very good.
That
is our equivalent of an episode.
Look at that foreshortening.
Yeah.
Those great Superman, like John Buscema things where the fist's here and he's like, and then the backhand. Yeah, it was great stuff. Great stuff.
He's known as Superman's fist.
That's right, true believers. So stay tuned. For the weird
next time we're going to talk about foreshortening.
The way he does it, the way Jumpin' John Buscema does it, it's 5 shortening.
And he does it the Marvel way.
Exactly. It was Jumpin' Jack Kirby and oh God, I used to have all that stuff.
Jazzy John Romita.
Jazzy John. Was it Sal Buscema? Something stomping Sal. It's been a while.
I don't remember.
I have, though. I still have.
It's been so long since I've looked at a comic book, you wouldn't believe it.
Yeah, I have a drawer full of the ones of my favorites. I had a collection. I gave it away for $100, basically. But I like.
Well, that isn't giving it away. That's selling it for $100.
Well, it was giving it away because in terms of that's the thing about drove me nuts of comic book. If you buy one, it was $8 because it was Fantastic Four 3 or 7 back in the 70s. But then when you go to sell it, they go, "I'll give you 50 cents for it." You're like, well, the comic book code says, the comic book buyer's guide says it's worth $12. Yeah, I'm not going to give you that. How do I make it?
Not in that condition, son.
Yeah.
You're not going to get that.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, thank you.
Don't. Poor Kirk has just lost his balance. He's flailing.
I never had it. I'm a flailer. All right, I'm going to go watch something interesting on YouTube.
Well, isn't that nice? Well, join us back next week to this locality.
Join us next week.
A heaping helping of our hospitality.
Darren Doctorman say,
did you ever watch movies about gladiators?
Roger. Over. All right.
Thank
you all.
Thanks, Kirk.
Spending this time listening to our palaver.
The Weirded Beardos are Kirk Thatcher and Darren Doctorman.
email them at theweirdedbeardos@gmail.com.